Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of the GOAZCATS.com football preview show. We thank you all for watching last week and obviously some positivity to talk about. Troy, this is Matt Moreno of GOAZCATS.com, senior editor here with Troy Hutchison, staff writer from GOAZCATS.com. We were both in San Diego last week. It was a warm one, Troy. Still kind of peeling from that open air press box, got a little bit sunburned. But it wasn't for naught, we were able to see a win finally. First one since the Cal game last year for Arizona, but looked a lot different than that Cal game. Really looked like an Arizona team that was a lot different than a lot of the teams we've seen in recent years. Let's just start with your general thoughts on the season opening win over San Diego State. What impressed you about what Arizona was able to do at Snapdragon Stadium?
Well, I think it went from the get-go. Arizona took the ball, drove it downfield pretty much with ease. They settled for a field goal, and you're like, okay, they're having red zone issues, which they talked about all offseason correcting. And then all of a sudden they get that block punt by Dalton Johnson. They are able to recover that, score real quick, and it's 10-0 Arizona. And you're like, wow, there's a different energy. I really felt that last year during the 2021 season. It seemed like the coaching staff with Jedd Fisch and, being new and the players there, they're kind of feeling out games. I don't think they were very, I don't want to say aggressive because he had aggressive play calling, but it seemed like they were just going through the motion of a game where Saturday versus San Diego State, they were taking the game to the Aztecs. And I don't think Arizona's played with that aggression in a long time. And they even had a moment where San Diego State could have tied the game and got right back in it after Jayden de Laura threw a pick. And you're like, okay, this could be the here we go again moment. And they're able to come up with a turnover. He goes downfield, scores a touchdown, making it a 14-point game right before half. And you're like, wow, this isn't the same Arizona team we have seen in previous years or even last season. Just a different mindset, different attitude, and you really saw it on defense as well. Just the energy that the team played with, I don't think we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the things that stood out to me was just the confidence level, even however many feet we are above the field. It just looked like a different demeanor all across the board for the team. It felt like they didn't ever seem like they were like, oh, we're just happy to be here. We're intimidated by this team that beat us last season. I mean, they looked like a team that was very determined and very confident in what they were doing and what they were about. It started early with that sack from Hunter Echols. And I think they just kind of said, all right, like we're a good team. We're different. And I think that really started to resonate throughout the game. And as you mentioned, all those moments where you said, oh, this is old Arizona, they're going to fold. They just didn't, time and time again. They just continued to come up with the right play. It was really impressive. I mean, it just looked like a completely different team. And I didn't think that was possible. I know that's the goal. When you build a team in 2022 through the transfer portal and you bring in some different players and you add some new pieces, I think the hope is that you look completely different from the year before if you're a one-win team. But it feels like the hope and the reality are two different things. But for Arizona, that just hasn't been the case. And now, when we're talking about like the fourth quarter of that game against San Diego State, I'm going, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next because now there's going to be some expectations. Now you look like that against a team that, pretty much dominated you last year. Now there's going to be some expectations. I know we'll get to this week's game, obviously, as we move forward here in today's show. But, I think we kind of thought the same thing and have the same thoughts about, what stood out, which is, those hurdles that normally they wouldn't get, past last year. And they kind of cleared them and made, a strong effort to look better and just look more confident as a team. Jayden de Laura is obviously one of the big stories. He ended up winning Offensive Player of the Week in the Pac-12. Full disclosure, didn't vote for him. I voted for Jacob Cowling. I thought his performance was impressive, but Jayden de Laura is not undeserving. I think he was very impressive as well. Obviously, Jacob Cowling needs to catch those passes from somebody, and Jayden de Laura, looked like the guy that got voted, Pac-12 Freshman of the Year last year. And so, what impressed you about what he brought to the table? 299 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, an interception that I think everyone kind of assumes or it agrees like probably shouldn't have happened. I think if he had to do it over again, it wouldn't have happened. It was one of those throws where you go, no, what's he doing? I think he was probably, even as he was throwing it, going, what are you doing? But he has the one interception, but 4 touchdowns, 299 yards passing, looked really good. Made some plays kind of out of nothing at times, kind of got to do a little bit of that freelancing that kind of, I think, made him successful at Washington State at times. So what impressed you about what he brought to the table in game one?
Number one is just the confidence that he played with. Even though he had that pick, they were able to get an interception and get him the ball back, and didn't seem like it fazed him. He drove down the field and scored a touchdown, and that was pretty much the deciding factor in that game, that moment right there. A lot of quarterbacks you see hang their head, and they're thinking about that previous play, and he just put it behind him and was able to get right back out there on the field. So that's number one to me. Number two is his quick release. I think he has a very quick release, a very fast one. Compared to quarterbacks we've seen here at Arizona. And although the offensive line, I think, did a very good job of improving off of last season, and they're better up front, the defenders for San Diego State didn't have a lot of time to get back there and get to him. They had one sack, but overall, he was just able to make the reads, the correct reads, really quickly, getting the ball out, hitting them in that pocket where they were sitting in the zone or coming off of a break on man. And he was just able to find his guys very fast. And you just see the understanding of the playbook. I think the touchdown to T-Mac really shows that. You have Jacob Cowing lined up on the left side there, and he's running kind of like I don't want to say a fake slant, but he goes back to the left side, and that frees open the field for T-Mac over the middle. And Jayden de Laura looks off the defender by looking at Cowing and then goes right away at T-Mac, right on the slant, perfect timing. Safety hits him over the middle, catches it for a touchdown, but it opens up that window, his vision of the field, looking the defender off and then going back to the guy that he was going to go to all along. So just having that quick release and understanding the playbook was highly impressive.
You mentioned a few names there. We've talked a lot. I've already mentioned about the new guys, Jayden de Laura being one of them, T-Mac being another one. That was kind of the other thing that stood out to me when watching the game was everybody or not everybody, but a lot of the key guys that they went out and got made plays. DJ Williams scored a touchdown and transferred from Florida State. T-Mac, you mentioned, Jacob Cowling, Hunter Echols, Jayden de Laura. I mean, you look at a lot of the guys, and the reason they went out and got those players is to make an impact and to start helping them win games. Were you even a little bit surprised? I know you've watched camp. We've watched a lot of these guys during the spring for months now. I've seen what they can do, but were you still surprised at how much of an impact they're able to make right away in game one, knowing that, some guys, it's going to take them a little bit of time to adjust to the system. Obviously, we're talking about a lot of guys on offense where the system last year, what we saw was really complex, and guys had to take some time to learn it before they started to have success and kind of reach their potential within the offense. Were you surprised at all to see the guys that were making plays, do so immediately, being that they are, new guys?
Offensively, I don't think so. I expected T-Mac and Cowing to make huge impacts, and they did. DJ Williams, he got the hot hand, and he was able to carry the football. He did a very good job there. But for me, it was defensively. Hunter Echols, who has been really good in practice this offseason for Arizona, to go out there the first play of the game and record a sack or tackle for loss, whatever you want to call it. I think that's what it was scored. I just was amazed by really the fire he played with while he was on the field. He was all over there. I mean, he had another play where he almost sacked Burmeister, but he was able to duck him and get away. Eventually, he ended up throwing the ball away. Just the energy that he brought defensively. At USC, he kind of was lost in the shuffle there at times. Had a really good year. I think it was year 2 when Nansen was there, his sophomore season. And so just to see him back in that system, and against San Diego State, who has a pretty good offensive line and likes to run the football, to be able to be all over the field to make that kind of impact and really lead the defense and say, this is what we're about. I mean, I think it was a tone sitter defensively. That was highly impressive.
And be honest, because we obviously talked about the offensive player of the week in the Pac-12. Arizona also had a defensive lineman of the week in the Pac-12 in the first week of the season. Did you realize that Jalen Harris had reached his career high in tackles in that game?
That I did not. I know he had the sack, but when he had 8 tackles, I was like, whoa, wow. He was kind of all over the field. I mean, I don't think he was bad at all. I thought he played a very solid game, but I didn't think he had that great of a game. But overall, phenomenal performance. And you're seeing his workouts in the weight room starting to pay off for him. He really worked on his lower body this offseason. and now it's paying dividends for him out there on the field.
We've seen a lot on the message boards this week, a lot of comparisons from between him and Hunter Echols, who Hunter Echols is just a lighter guy, a little bit, more of a hybrid linebacker type than what Jalen Harris is now. At one point, Jalen Harris was kind of, in that mold of being a hybrid linebacker defensive end, and they bulked him up a lot. I think there is the misconception that the two positions are the same exact position. The cat and the defensive end position that Jalen Harris is playing, they're a little bit different. So I think it's difficult to make that comparison. I know, obviously, I think Jalen Harris is probably going to help them more against the run in a lot of situations now because of that added weight and the bulk that he's put on. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they both kind of work together throughout the season. But kind of on that note, Johnny Nansen was calling his first game as a defensive coordinator. Everyone loves to criticize the coaches in every way, every fan, after any game. But there wasn't a whole lot to criticize with Johnny Nansen after this last game. Obviously, a different system what they were running than what they were running last year. What did you think of his game plan and the execution of his new system?
Well, honestly, I loved it. He was able to mix things up. We saw the 5 defensive lineman looks that he calls the junk formation. It's kind of like a heavy dime. You saw the 4-2-5. You saw a little bit of 4-3. He wasn't afraid to give the offense different looks and keep them on their toes. And I just love what he did with Burmeister. Burmeister is known as a running quarterback. I believe he had 500 yards rushing last season for Virginia Tech. And he kind of used Colby Cage as somewhat of a spy. I wouldn't say just a hardcore spy that we're used to seeing in a man formation. But every time Burmeister rolled out, Colby Cage was right there either to force a throwaway or tackle him so he wouldn't get to the line of gain. I just liked how he was able to rotate guys and then use those guys in the proper area to help that defense succeed.
You mentioned Colby Cage. That was kind of one of the new faces, new players that not new to the team, but just new to the rotation and new to being a starter for sure for Arizona. Was there anybody else defensively that really stood out to you that you were impressed by? Maybe guys we hadn't seen before, or maybe just guys in general that you're impressed by. Obviously, Jerry Roberts finishes with 12 tackles almost quietly. I don't know if you can get 12 tackles quietly. I know you actually asked Jane DeLore because when he was looking at the stats, he said, wow, after the game. And you said, what did you say wow about? And he said, well, Jerry had 12 tackles. Who were maybe some of the guys that impressed you outside of the usual kind of faces that we talk about?
Yeah, for me, and I'm going to go back to probably one of my favorite defensive players on this team is Paris Shand. That guy's been putting a lot of work during the offseason. I thought of him as potentially a breakout player for Arizona this year. He had a very solid year his freshman season. And you just look at what he was able to do against San Diego State in the run game. I think he finished with 4 or 5 tackles, which I know isn't a high number, but he was clogging up running lanes. He was forcing the running back to go to the outside or go to the inside of whatever direction he wanted them to go. He was forcing them to do that. And then he had the forced fumble. He was able to pop the ball free. And just the athleticism that he brings to the table for Arizona on the defensive line is huge. That's probably the guy that stood out to me. That's not a well-known guy amongst Arizona fans, but probably should be. And then lastly, Isaiah Rutherford. I mean, let's be honest. Last season was pretty bad for a guy that was supposed to be this highly coveted corner coming out of Notre Dame, transferring to Arizona. There was times where he got burned on the field, and it was like, what is he doing out there? He doesn't look engaged in the game. And there was none of that. I think he had a tackle for loss, and we were both like, whoa, that is not the same Isaiah Rutherford we saw last season. And I know he gave up the touchdown, and Nansen mentioned this. That was a good defensive play. And his teammates went over and picked him up, but he played that ball pretty well. Probably should have punched it out, but didn't. It happens. And just the growth that he has shown at corner, I wasn't expecting, even during the offseason, seeing him in training camp. I didn't expect him to have that good of a performance. I know San Diego State isn't a pass-first team, but just a very solid job out there, and that gives Arizona more depth as they move along this season.
You kind of took the next topic out of my brain, I think, because I was going to bring up Isaiah Rutherford because obviously he's had his struggles, and I think the telling thing was not that he necessarily gave up the touchdown, but that he bounced back and he finished out the game and played a pretty strong game the rest of the day. If they can get another cornerback to be someone who can contribute and they can rely on when Tre'Davious Stukes is able to be fully back, which could very well be this week, That's important, especially when you're going up against a bunch of teams that want to pass the ball, but especially this week, a team that wants to pass the ball and is going to, split out 5 wide at sometimes and have a lot of guys out there that can catch passes. You're going to need that extra guy out on the field who can, do some things and cover some players. So I think it was a good early sign for Arizona to have Isaiah Rutherford come out and have a strong game. Had the one miscue, but like I said, I think the bounce back was really important for him. And the fact that he was able to finish out that game without any other issues. He didn't fold and give up a bunch of touchdowns, because we know that's possible. Obviously a lot more talented players than what San Diego State had, but someone like, Drake London last year, it was like, it just didn't stop. They're like, I'm going to pick on you every time. And it was, all the DBs, not just Isaiah Rutherford, but, I think that said a lot that he was able to bounce back from that. And like I said, if they can get someone some confidence, another player some confidence to get in there and do some things at the cornerback position, it's a positive sign. So, anything else you want to talk about with that last game to kind of put a bow on San Diego State? I know we've talked it to death over the last week just because it's been so different. All of us who cover Arizona, I think, are excited to cover a win. So we kind of talked it to death. But is there anything else that really stood out to you that you think is going to be important as they move ahead to this next week?
Yeah, I think it's not being said enough how dominating of a win that was. Because if you take out that block punt and Jaden DeLora hits T-Mac, I believe it was on the right side in the end zone, you're talking about a potential 45 to 10 game, 45 to 13 game. I think that game could have gotten a lot uglier than what it did. But, Arizona had that punting mistake, and really it was just a lineman being in the wrong position, ran into the punt. That's pretty correctable. But that was about near as perfect as we've seen Arizona play maybe in about 2 years. I mean, I can't remember one recently, but that was a nearly perfect game from Arizona and a great way to start the season.
So obviously now moving ahead, defensively, it's going to, look very similar to Arizona's offense. Mississippi State's defensive coordinator came from San Diego State. They run the same exact scheme, not a very similar scheme. There are some different wrinkles to it, as Brendan Carroll said earlier in the week, but essentially it's the same scheme that they're going to be facing. So I think I'm sure going to add some confidence to them. But offensively for Mississippi State, it's a lot different than what San Diego State wants to do. We were talking a lot about the running game last week. Obviously, Mike Leach, air raid system, they're going to want to pass the ball. They passed it, I think, close to 50 times in this last game. They're going to want to pass the ball. Mike Leach has had a lot of success against Arizona, different coaching staff, a lot of different players, but he's had a lot of success, beating Pac-12 defenses. In many ways, the Pac-12 teams have kind of built their systems defensively to slow down, a type of system like Mike Leach has. So as you look ahead to this Saturday, the home opener, what's on your mind about this matchup, and what are some things that you think Arizona needs to improve on this week that maybe it didn't do as well against San Diego State?
Yeah, I think this might be the toughest offense Arizona plays all season in terms of throwing the ball. You said it, they passed the ball for 450 yards last week against Memphis. That's a little bit more than 100. But, it's a different type of offense, and I don't know if they're going to face anything quite like it. So number one is, can the secondary repeat what it did against San Diego State? They only gave up 62 yards passing against the Aztecs. They're not going to do that against Mississippi State. That's impossible. But can you hold them to under 400? I think that's the number you're going to have to look at because they're going to get their yards. Yards after catch is a big thing for Mississippi State. So that's another aspect of this game is, can you tackle an open space? Because Mike Leach does a great job of putting his athletes in one-on-one positions. It's just you and your man between the first down marker. Make him tackle you, and if he doesn't, you're off for 15 yards. Arizona needs to really wrap up and get in really game tackle, as Coach Nansen alluded to this week, to avoid that. That's number two. And then lastly, they had a good performance running the football against San Diego State, who's a good run defense team. But can you do it again? And can you do it to a higher level? I think you're going to see more of a balanced offense than we did last week. And I think Arizona, if they can get to that 200 yards rushing mark, they have a really good shot in this game.
So if you look at, the numbers that Mississippi State put up against Memphis, a lot more impressive. It was kind of a weird game. They had that lightning delay that, shut things down for, I think, a couple hours. Then they came back out and finished it out, and Mississippi State looked pretty good after that. It was a little bit closer, early in the game, but obviously when you look at the final numbers, it just looks like a typical, Mike Leach type of game. They passed for 49 times, 5 touchdowns. Will Rogers has 450 passing yards, spread around to 12 different receivers. When you look at kind of what they're about, what Mississippi State is about, they kind of did everything. The thing that was odd was they ran the ball 34 times, 30 times by running backs. So that's really odd. I mean, I feel like there's been times when we've watched Arizona play Washington State when Mike Leach was there, and they've run the ball like 5 times or, single digits. So I don't think it's that rare. It's more rare to see them run it 30 times. So as you kind of assess what you think you'll be seeing out on the field this week from both teams, what do you kind of make of what Mississippi State did when running the ball, and do you think that's going to be a factor? I know you talked to Johnny Nansen about that this week, and what are your thoughts just on their running game, and is it going to be something they do again this week, or do you think they'll go back to just what they've done before and try and pass the ball all over Arizona?
Yeah, no, I think they're going to try to pass the ball all over Arizona in its secondary. 30 times rushing, 34 times rushing. That's a extreme rarity for Mike Leach, and I think they're going to toss that out because even if you look at it, they ran the ball 34 times and only had 97 yards. They weren't really effective in the running game, and I think the key was they were so far ahead of Memphis that they were just trying to run clock and get that game over with. They had 41 minutes of time of possession. Mike Leach is usually a guy that really doesn't look at that stat, similar to when Rich Rod was at Arizona. It's just offense, offense, offense. You don't care if you have the ball long or you have it a short time. So I think they're going to go to the air raid, and they're going to test this secondary early and often. And it's not going to be the deep ball. I think it's going to be a lot of short, intermediate passing attempts, quick screens, halfbacks, passes, bubble screens, hitch routes, slants. Just, I would say 8 yards and in is going to be the sweet spot for Mississippi State in this matchup. And then on the flip side of things, Arizona held the ball for 32 minutes against San Diego State. I think they're going to try to increase that number to 38 and try to hold on to the ball to give their defense a break, because one of the things that Mississippi State's offense does is it doesn't allow you the time to substitute guys in and out of the lineup, which Coach Nansen wants to do. So how is this defensive line going to respond to an offense that's just going to be kind of up-tempo and you're not subbing guys out? I think it's a very good defensive line for Arizona, but I think the defensive line and the secondary are going to be tested this week.
So kind of on that note, as you look at, across the board and look at the different players who are going to make an impact in this game, we've talked a lot about them already. Give me 3 players that you think, both offensively and defensively, from Arizona that are going to play a vital role in Saturday's game and be, part of what determines who wins this game.
Yeah, I think offensively we'll start there. I think it's going to be the running backs for Arizona. We're just going to clog them in as one unit there, and we'll see if one of those guys can get hot, because if they can, expect that guy to get the ball 13 to 16 times throughout the game and kind of slow down the Mississippi State offense by running the ball on your own offensive end. Number 2 on offense is, let's go with Cowing. I mean, tremendous performance against San Diego State and a very good secondary. Can you do it again when everybody's watching you? I think that's what people want to see, because I think Mississippi State is going to hone in on him a little bit. That might free up other opportunities for guys like T-Mac and, AJ. We saw AJ Jones, Dorian Senior, and maybe even the tight end position. But look to him on offense. And then defensively, let's look at 2 guys. I think Keon Bars is going to be huge, trying to get the push up front to get their quarterback to roll out. Rogers isn't necessarily a running quarterback. He's a little bit mobile, but he's not going to kill you with his feet. So if you're able to get uncomfortable and make him feel your presence, even if you're not getting to him, you're going to make him roll out and maybe miss some passes. And I think that's going to be huge. And lastly, let's talk about the leader in the secondary in Christian Roland Wallace. This is going to be his game. Everybody's talked about him taking that next step and becoming one of the upper echelon corners, not only in the conference, but in the country. This is going to test him. This is going to see where he's at, because they're going to go all over the field. And can he keep the secondary connected and communication out there on the field? and have really, I think, his statement game in an Arizona uniform, kind of letting the country know that he is one of those guys.
It's interesting, and it's not your fault, and it's not any of our faults, but it feels like the focus this week has been Mike Leach air raid offense versus Arizona defense. It's kind of been the story, but I feel like an underrated part of this is Mississippi State's defense. They're pretty good. They're not bad. Jedd Johnson, one of their linebackers, had 13 tackles. Obviously, you're going up against Memphis. They're trying to climb back into it, get more tackles that way. But they made a lot of plays. I think their defense is a little bit underrated, and it's kind of an interesting game for Arizona because if you lose, the fans are going to say, "Oh, it was an SEC team. Like they're just old Arizona. They can't even beat a middle of the road, SEC team." And if you win, it's like, "Oh, you just beat a middle of the road SEC team." I think Mississippi State is better than what people think they are. I think Arizona is better than what people think they are. I think people learned that last week. But it's kind of an interesting game from that standpoint. But I think the defense is an underrated part of Mississippi State. I think they're going to factor into this game a little bit more than people think, meaning Arizona's offense has to be a little bit sharper, I think. Not miss some of those things that they missed last week. And if they do that, I think they'll be just fine. Because it was kind of almost there. It was almost a complete performance from the offense, but there was enough there. There was enough mistakes there that you go, a better team, an SEC team with SEC players up front and defensively in the secondary, will make you pay for those. And it won't be, an 18-point win. It'll be a much closer game. And that's kind of where I'm leaning right now. I won't give away our predictions just yet, or my prediction just yet, but kind of leaning that way at this point. But what are some things in this game as you assess, both teams? And I know you did your tail of the tape and kind of divided who had the advantage at which position, but what are a few different things that you're going to be watching closely for both teams, for both sides of the ball, that are going to be some key factors in determining who wins this game on Saturday?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Mississippi State does have a underrated defense, and it starts really not only with their linebackers, but their defensive line as well, especially at the nose tackle position, defensive tackle, whatever you want to call that. They have some dudes there. They're able to rotate some guys in and out. Arizona's offensive line did a great job against San Diego State, but now you're going up against bigger, stronger, faster defensive tackles and defensive linemen. Can they have a repeat performance? Are we going to see a digression? That's what I want to see. That's number one for Arizona. And then for Mississippi State, the defense is underrated, but I want to see their secondary, because I'm going to admit their secondary is a little bit shaky to me. Memphis was able to make them pay at times. Are they able to contain Jacob Cowing, Tetero McMillan, Dorian Senior? And then you're going to see some tight end usage out of Arizona. So I think, are they able to contain Arizona's receiving core and skill position players?
One thing I'm going to add in here to your points is Arizona in the red zone. I don't think they can have any mistakes. They were able to work through that early when, against San Diego State, where we said, "Oh, what happened to running the ball in the red zone, Jedd? You talked about it so much, and then it doesn't happen." And then they settle for a field goal, early. And that's one of those things where that was like the first early red zone possession. And you go, they have to score here. I don't think they can have those against Mississippi State. I think knowing what they want to do offensively, they're going to want to score and score a lot. You can't settle for field goals. You're going to have to score touchdowns. And obviously the rest of that San Diego State game played out like Arizona would hope. They were able to score touchdowns, get in the end zone when they got into the red zone, utilize all their weapons in that area. I think they have to continue that, but I think that's going to be something to watch. If Arizona even has to settle for, I think, 2 field goals or 1 field goal, that's not going to win this game, I don't think. And maybe, they can tack on a bunch more touchdowns after that. But I think they're going to have to score a lot and score, once they get into the red zone. Not that it was an issue last week, but one game doesn't, completely turn around what we saw last year. And so I think they need to continue to build on what they did in the red zone against San Diego State, but also, not necessarily revert to what they were doing last year. So I think that's going to be a key as well. We'll get to the predictions. I'll start with you. What do you think? What do you seen in this game? What stands out to you? What's going to make the difference? And finally, how do you see this thing playing out?
Arizona is 1-5-1 versus SEC. The last win coming against Auburn in 1976 during the Jim Young era. I believe that was Jim Young's second season, somewhere around there. The one tie coming against Georgia in the Sun Bowl. Not a lot of history against the SEC. Mississippi State, They've never traveled to Tucson. I don't know when the last time they've traveled west of Texas was, but it's a long trip. And I expect Arizona Stadium to be sold out. I think this is going to be a really loud crowd, a Rockets crowd early on in this game. And if Arizona is able to keep in the game and keep the crowd into it, this could be interesting. And I think Arizona will be able to do that. And eventually, I think they pull away. I think Arizona wins this because they're at home. They're going to get a really good performance out of Jaden DeLora again. Defensively, they're going to come up with the 2 turnovers that really decide this football game. Arizona wins 42-28. A late touchdown pulls away, and they go 2-0 heading into their game against North Dakota State.
Wow. I'm going to win as well, which is kind of rarity. I mean, we didn't really pick them to win a lot last year. I know I didn't. As everyone was criticizing me about, I picked them to go 4-8. I said I left open the possibility of I can reassess things after the first game. I'm starting to reassess some things with Arizona. I mean, they look very good in that first game against San Diego State. This is a better opponent. It's a style of play that doesn't match up necessarily very well with Arizona, at least old Arizona, and what we've known before. Mike Leach, I remember the last time they played, Washington State, a Mike Leach-led Washington State team played Arizona. They gave up a nice 69 points, Troy, and that's a lot of touchdowns. There's some players who still remember those times, I think. So I'm not ready to write off and say, Arizona is a new Arizona just yet. But I do think they're playing better. I do think there's a lot to like about this team. I do think the offense is going to continue to do what it did against San Diego State. There's going to be more opportunities for turnovers for the defense, which I think they have that in their mind. It was kind of like one of those things when you're talking about a basketball player who's kind of in a shooting slump, just kind of has to see one go through the net, and then they kind of start to flow a little bit. I think that's a similar case with Arizona and its turnovers. I think it was like, okay, we got one. We know how to do this. And then, they ended up getting 2 in that game. And so I think, it's one of those things where you can start to see the wheels turning a little bit defensively with the turnovers. I think they're going to have more opportunities. I know they're going to have more opportunities to get some in this game. Will Rogers threw an interception against Memphis last week. So I think there's going to be those opportunities out there. The key is going to be really interesting is can they get to Will Rogers? Because I think if they can disrupt him in the backfield, and that's where the defensive line is going to really come into play. If they can get to him and force him into some bad throws, I think that can really change this game. And it's tough because the goal of the whole air raid offense is to get the ball out fast. You don't want to be put in those situations. So I really do like, everything that's going for Arizona. And I think I'm going to go with Arizona in this game again. I do think it's going to be a close game. I'm trying to decide if Arizona is going to reach 45 points. I think it's maybe still a little early to do that. But I have Arizona winning this one 42-41 in a close game. I think they're pretty evenly matched teams. I think Mississippi State is still a Mike Leach team. I still think they're going to score. I don't think Arizona's the dominant defense yet, that it potentially will be down the line. But I think it's going to be a really entertaining game. I think it's one of those games that could be very much a turning point for the Jedd Fisch era at Arizona. You haven't played an SEC team in a long time. I don't even know how old you were, Troy. You were real young, I think. I was not very old. I was older, but not very old. The last time they played an SEC team, last time they beat an SEC team, neither one of us were alive. I think it's a chance for a real turning point for Jedd Fisch. And I think, obviously they've sold a ton of tickets already. You expect it to be a sellout. If it's not a sellout, it's going to be close. It's going to be a lot different than last year, no matter what, in terms of crowd and atmosphere. We'll see what happens with Jedd's new third quarter song. We'll see how much that ignites the crowd or doesn't. Who knows? But I think there's going to be a new energy about the stadium. I think getting that win last week is going to get some more people in the stands. I think that's going to feed into the team. I think that's where you have the advantage of being at home. But it just feels like one of those games where if Arizona's able to win, they can say, hey, we beat an SEC team, a team that was pretty good. Let's get this thing moving. And then I really do think they have a chance to beat North Dakota State. I wouldn't have said that, a couple months ago, but the way they're playing right now, and if they're able to get a win over Mississippi State, I think 3-0 in non-conference is really realistic. And if you're talking about that, you're talking about a completely different season than I was talking about last week. And so it's going to be a really interesting time. It's a really interesting weekend. I think if it goes well for Arizona, it could be the thing that kind of springboards them into the, this next phase and gets them out of kind of that era of whatever that was the last few years and, being a down in the dumps team and gets them going, oh, this is like a legitimate going to be a legitimate team and a legitimate contender in the years to come. Maybe it all doesn't happen this year, but I think if you can start to generate that buzz, it's interesting. I was just watching, I was telling someone else who hadn't seen it before, not to get off track here as we wrap up the podcast, but I was actually just watching it, before we started, the 2010 Iowa at Arizona game. And you just looked at the crowd a minute into that broadcast and it was insane. And I was like, I've seen that in, 11 years covering the team, maybe twice, a crowd like that, maybe never, to be honest. Maybe the Territorial Cup in 2014 when it was winner take all, for the South Division, maybe then. Outside of that, I don't really remember a game like that. And so you just look at what Arizona could be, when things are really rolling. You had two ranked teams in that game, but it can happen. And I think that's what Jedd is really banking on. And the first thing is you have to win games. You have to win games like this weekend. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. But, what are your thoughts on just kind of how the importance of this game? It doesn't feel like that when you just kind of take it at face value and what it is. But I truly believe it could be one of those kind of next turning points for Jedd Fisch that really sells the fan base on like, hey, I'm the right guy. We're making all the right moves.
Yeah, I think this is the most important game Arizona's had since the days of the Rich Rod era, to be honest. It kind of reminds me similarly to Rich Rod, I believe, his second home game against Oklahoma State. The Cowboys came in here, I believe, number 19 in the country, and they whooped them. And that kind of put everybody on notice that Arizona was back from whatever that end of the Stoops era was after a successful era underneath Stoops. This seems like that type of game. It seems like a very program-changing type of win, potentially. I know it's not a ranked SEC team. I know it's not a top 10 team, but this is a momentum game. And it's funny because you brought up that Iowa game. That's what type of atmosphere I'm expecting come Saturday. My 27 years living here in Tucson, going to U of A games, covering Arizona athletics, that was the loudest crowd I've ever heard at Arizona Football Stadium. That in the Oregon game in 2009. I just remember going into that game and you could just feel that this was a big game. And it's kind of having that feeling right now, like this is a really big game. And you hear people talking about it around town. And it's like, man, Arizona, they beat San Diego State. Now they have Mississippi State. There hasn't been that buzz around the community in a long time. And this is something Arizona really needs to capitalize on.
Well, it just tells you, it speaks to how bad the team was the last few years and how bad the situation was. And that, one win can suddenly get people going like, oh, this is a real team, but it really does feel like that. I'm not just saying that just to say that. I mean, it definitely feels like this is an important game in the next step for what they want to be. And, when you're coming off a season where you won one game, like, this is a game that matters. So it's going to be definitely interesting, but do you have something else to add?
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, I think one of the things that has made me realize in terms of this program is different. Not only are the players bigger, faster, stronger, better coached, but it's a suit thing. They wore suits on the road. They wore suits on the plane. I know it's a little thing, but Jedd Fisch talks about being a professional, being that 33rd NFL team. And his team, the leaders on the unit decided to come to Coach Jedd Fisch and say, hey, we want to wear suits, home, away. Whenever it is game day, whenever that time comes, we want to be in suits, all kind of uniform. And to me, that's a mindset switch. It's not one that the coaches, forced upon the team. This was the team coming to the head coach. And that tells me these guys have matured than what they have been in the past. And they're ready to change things in Tucson, change things with the U of A.
I don't think it was forced. I don't think it was on accident either. I think that that's part of the whole mindset of having pride in what you're doing. And I think Jedd is trying to sell these players on, hey, be prideful about what you are. Yes, you won one game last year, but if you have some pride in who you are and what this program is, once you start to believe, I know he talks about that a lot, and it's kind of maybe his Jedd Lasso coming out in him, but where he talks about, just belief and having the right mindset. And I think the players are starting to believe that. And that can be a powerful thing. And I think we're starting to see that when you combine that with some upper level talent, some better talent, you get some good wins and you get, a good football team. And so feels like they're on the right path. And I think that's maybe more than anything, something that Arizona fans appreciate is just on the right path. You look like you're making progress. And right now, Arizona looks like it's making progress. So we'll see how much this weekend, Saturday night, 8 p.m. Gotta love those late starts, Troy. It'll be cooler at least. But it'll be a late night for everyone involved. But it should be a fun night, fun game, fun weekend in Tucson. We appreciate you listening. We'll catch you guys on the next one.